Draft was this week, which expectations were it would bring 300,000 people to the city of Nashville. They built a whole building just for this one event and then filled it with concerts and competitions and entertainment. They had filled it with these anticipation announcements, celebrations, all these things, and a whole bunch of guys who had weird things on the insides of their jackets. They kept wanting to show the inside of their suit coats. Did you notice that? Somebody's going to have to explain that to me because there was writing and things on there that I couldn't always understand. You can explain that to me later. But this draft got me thinking about how backwards that is from almost every other sporting event that we experience in this country. It's backwards. Think about it. Olympics, World Cup, the World Series, things like that. March Madness, the hard work is to get there. And then there's this event. And when the event is done, then it is over and it's time to relax. It's time to recover and then, of course, start preparing for the next season. But most sporting events are that way. The hard work is to get prepared and ready, and then it is that event that is the hard work, and then it is over and it's time to relax. But that draft is backwards. I'm not discounting the hard work that these athletes had put in to get them there, but in reality, from what I've read and what I've heard, the life of when you begin on an NFL team, that is a level of hard work that these guys have never experienced before. There is this event, and then the hard work starts. This thing happens, and then you have to figure out how to live with it. The really hard work begins. It's backwards from what we're used to. But the truth is, we have a lot of things that work that way. Weddings. There's a lot of work that goes into planning a wedding. There's a lot of thick binders, checklists, and a whole industry designed to freak you out about planning a wedding. And then there's this event. But if you've ever been married, if you've ever been around somebody who's married, you know that the really hard work of being married is not the planning of the wedding. The really hard work is figuring out how to be married once the event is done. And it goes on for the rest of your life. The really hard work, there's this event. But the real work starts right afterwards. Graduating from school. Yes, you've worked to that point, absolutely. And then this thing happens, there's this event, and then you are working for the rest of your life. This event happens, and then the work starts. Having a child, right? How about getting a diagnosis? Forgiveness works this way. Forgiveness begins with a conscious choice. It is the deliberate decision to no longer be trapped by what has happened in the past. And it is something that we make a conscious choice. It begins there. This event happens, we decide, and then the really hard work begins. And it is hard work when we're talking about forgiveness. The hard work begins of how do I live into it? But it works in that order. It's this thing happens, this event happens, and then we have to learn how to live into it. And our lives are actually filled with quite a lot of these things. Something happens, and then the hard work begins. How do we live into it? And what does this mean for us in our lives as we go on after this thing has happened? Now, I was thinking that I really can't blame the disciples for being behind locked doors in our gospel story today. This is Easter Day. The world has gone crazy around them. It is chaos. They've just watched Jesus dragged away by soldiers. They know that they are probably next. And what is it that we do when we're afraid? What is it that we do when we're feeling insecure? We lock doors. We build walls, we draw lines, we push people outside, we try to control our immediate environment. This is as natural of a thing as we all do, and I would be there. I would be the one locking that door, knowing and expecting that what I'm going to hear is not a polite knock, but the thumping fist of soldiers, the guttural, "Open in the name of Caesar." Blood and dying and pain are probably coming next. I would be there locking that door, and I can't blame them for being there. But the thing is, now that resurrection has come into the world, Jesus no longer respects our boundaries. And Jesus doesn't knock when we are afraid. Jesus steps into the middle. Jesus just appeared there. But notice what he says. He doesn't say, "What were you thinking?" He doesn't say, "Where were you?" He doesn't say, "I'm so disappointed." Jesus says, "Peace be with you." Now that word peace on Jesus' lips, Jesus was probably speaking some version of Hebrew, and the Hebrew for peace is shalom, but it's not peace the way we often think of it, as the absence of conflict or of everybody just playing nice. Shalom in Hebrew has as its root completion, fulfillment, everything right, the way God means. And from that, then, we get that sense of peace the way we often think of it. Jesus says, "May everything be right with you. Peace be with you." And then it says, he shows them his hands and his feet. The love of God leaves a mark even on Jesus. Now, it doesn't say why Thomas isn't there. It sounds like he's the only one who's not locked up in this room with them, and we don't know why. We have some hints about Thomas elsewhere in the gospel, though. Thomas seems to be the disciple with the most courage. Because just a few chapters ago, when Jesus said, "Let's go into Judea, down by Jerusalem," and all the other disciples say, "Jesus, you know they're trying to kill you, right?" Thomas is the one who turns to them and says, "Well, I guess we better go die with him." So we have this hint that Thomas is filled with some stern stuff, and maybe that's why he's not there. Perhaps Thomas is the only disciple with the courage to be out in the city to learn what's going on. We don't know why, except that we know he's not there and he missed it. This thing has happened and Thomas missed it. He didn't get to see the hands and the feet, to hear Jesus' voice, to have Jesus breathe on them. But Thomas knows himself, it seems, and Thomas knows he's going to need it. This thing has happened, and he's going to have to figure out how to live within this. Now that resurrection is loose in the world, Thomas knows that he's going to need to know, can the love of God really carry our brokenness? Can the love of God, is it really going to hold our wounds? Could it possibly be true that God loves us like that? That's what Thomas is asking for. And a week later, now Thomas is with them there in the room. The doors are shut. Put up the walls. Hold everything out. Jesus does not walk, but steps into the middle of our fear. And what does he say? With me, peace be with you. And he turns to Thomas. And there are things for us to learn in this moment with Thomas, because it occurred to me Thomas is the one who most authentically is trying to figure out how to live with Easter. He's trying to learn, okay, this thing has happened. Now I got to figure out how to live with it. And what does this mean for the rest of our lives? So we can learn from this. And I noticed 3 things for us as we together are learning how to live as Easter people. This thing has happened. That's what we celebrated last week. Lilies and music and trumpets and new dresses. This thing has happened, this earth-shaking moment when a tomb wound up empty. This thing has happened, resurrection, the first new thing under the sun has entered the world, and now it is loose, and now we are figuring out how to live with it. And there are 3 things for us to learn from this moment between Jesus and Thomas. So number 1, think about what Jesus invites Thomas. He says, here, put your hand on my side. Picture this moment for a second. And imagine where you have to place them. It doesn't work if Jesus is across the room. Jesus has to step in close, doesn't he? Put your hand. Imagine how close they must have stood. Jesus steps to Thomas, and this teaches us about what it means to live as Easter people. It means Jesus steps in close. Jesus does not respect our personal boundaries. But Jesus steps in close and invites us into this intimate moment. Put your hand here. This tells us about the relationship that Jesus is inviting us to. Jesus steps in close. The second thing that we learn is what Jesus doesn't say. Jesus never says, Thomas, what's with all the questions? Jesus never says, Thomas, you shouldn't be asking those things. Because what Jesus says is, peace be with you. And one of the things this teaches us and reminds us is, well, first of all, there's a really bad translation moment in this gospel that we have got to fix. Because we know that faith is a relationship. Faith is our relationship with Jesus, and it's that living, growing, ongoing thing that we live out. Faith is a relationship. And when Jesus talking to Thomas says, put your hands here, put your hands here, and we heard it as, do not doubt, but believe. That's wrong. We have to fix this now, because that's not what the Greek actually says. We know Jesus did not speak English, and in the Greek that we've received, what it actually says is, do not unfaith, but faith. So faith in Greek is a thing we do. It's an action verb. It's a full contact kind of sport. Faith as relationship, then what Jesus is saying is, it's the difference between don't untie, tie, right? It's that notion of the flip-flop there. Do not unfaith, but faith. And faith is a relationship. The only thing that's opposite of a relationship is not doubt or questions. It's apathy. Apathy is the opposite of a relationship. It says, I don't care. You're not important enough for me to have any questions about, to want to know more, to grow and live into this. This is the opposite of a relationship, and that's what is the opposite of faith. Questions and doubts are part of a living faith. They belong because they are signs that we're taking it seriously. If God didn't want us to have questions as part of our faith. God should have made us so that we wouldn't have them. But no, God gave us thinking brains, and that is what we bring to the relationship. Questions and doubts belong. It's okay. It's a sign we're taking the relationship seriously. So, faith and doubt and questions all go together. Because faith is a relationship. Third thing, the gift that Jesus gives. Jesus breathes on Thomas and the disciples, and in turn breathes on us. This is the breath of God. But God breathes, and a lump of clay comes to life. God breathes, and a valley filled with dry bones begin moving, and they are alive. God breathes, and a lifeless, battered body laid in somebody else's tomb walks out, and resurrection is loose in the world. God breathes and gives life. And that is what Easter means. It is the gift of life that begins in baptism and stretches on to forever. It is, we are given Jesus' life that we are living. It's not even our own. We are living Jesus' life. Together. Learning how to do that. Following Jesus. Learning how to be Him in the world. Easter, this event, means we are living God's very life. Together, this thing has happened. Resurrection is loose in the world, and together, we are learning how to live that. I am profoundly grateful that I get to learn how to live out Easter with you.